Hello and welcome everyone to our session on AirMapper tips, tricks, and best practices. My name is Julio Petrovich. I'm product manager at NetAlly, and with me today we've got Mr. Dan Klinke, director of product marketing for NetAlly. Dan, please feel free to say hello.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you for being here.
So, before we even start, guys, this is the way it will work. Um, we'll go through the presentation. If you have any questions, though, don't be shy. Feel free to type those on the questions section. And Mr. Dan Klinke will answer any of your questions live as we can, or he will be happy to interrupt me anytime, and I'll be happy to also answer or help answer any of the questions. So don't be shy about asking questions anytime. Of course, at the end, we'll also have a quick Q&A session. So if there's any questions left over, I will answer those after the session. So what are we going to talk about today? There's a few topics. First, we'll start with a little introduction. After that, we'll dive into different tips, tricks, and best practices. Anything from before you start doing a site survey with AirMapper to, hey, tips and tricks on importing your floor plan. Scan preferences. We'll be talking about how to set up your project. A few more information on best practices on how to perform a site survey using AirMapper. How to save the results or how does it work. A few tips on analyzing the data on Link Live, and also if you are more into the offline method, also how to analyze the data on AirMagnet Survey Pro. And then as time allows, we'll also have a quick live demo. I'll show you some of the things we'll be covering today. So first, let's get started here. And you may be wondering, what's this session about? Well, it's not like a user guide. We're not going through all the details on how AirMapper works. Today, we'll mostly focus on best practices, little tips or things you may not know about that are available or that you can do using AirMapper Site Survey. We'll also highlight some new functionality that you may not be aware of that was released recently. And basically, the idea is to show you how it works, what are the best practices, tips or tricks, and basically help you learn how to quickly, easily, and efficiently perform a site survey using AirMapper on your AirCheck G2 or EtherScope NXG. So let's get started here pretty quickly. And basically, we'll start with, hey, even before you go out there and you start doing a site survey, what are the things you should be aware of? Well, a few things to keep in mind while you're doing or before you even start doing the site survey. First, we'll talk a little about floor plans. So some of these are basic things that you may be aware of because they're basically things that you will expect from any site surveying tool. For example, making sure that you remove any empty space from around the floor plan. So this example I got here, you can see that any extra blank space that you can remove is cut off. Sure, there's some blank space here and stuff, but basically the idea is to focus on the floor plan itself, not all the blank space around it. And that's a best practice that, hey, you may have seen with AirMagnet and other products out there. It makes it easier to zoom in. It also makes it easier to calibrate, and you don't have to worry about a bunch of blank space around it. Another tip or more a piece of information to know about when you're using AirMapper on the AirCheck G2 or EtherScope is that currently we support two image formats, JPEG or JPG and PNG. Notice, sure, we'll be expanding that in the future, but right now those are the two formats that are supported. So before you try importing a floor plan, make sure that your floor plans are saved on one of those two formats. And then another one, and you may be like, well, why does this make any, is this helpful at all? basically use a white or black and white technically background. The reason for that is that, hey, even though, let's say you have a very colorful floor plan and it may look nice, when you try to generate the heat maps afterwards to do your analysis, and that color on the background may make it a little more difficult to see the heat map itself or analyze the heat maps, since the colors may mix themselves and they may look wrong. So best practice is to use a white background or black and white background or floor plan. And that way, when you're done and you want to analyze the heat maps, it will be a lot easier to see what the colors are and how they change throughout the floor plan or the building. So a few things to keep in mind even before you start regarding floor plans. Another tip, and this one, we've had this question a few times now. It's like, wow, how do I make the battery on my AirCheck or EtherScope last all day? Sure, there's times when you have smaller projects or you just want to do a quick site survey and you can do it in a few minutes or maybe in an hour or two. And the battery on your AirCheck or EtherScope will last for more than that. Still, there might be bigger projects where you're like, man, I spend like 11 or 12 hours a day doing site surveys. And I don't want to spend time having to recharge the battery on my AirCheck or my EtherScope. So we were like, how can we help the guys out there, guys and gals, and basically extend the battery life of the AirCheck or EtherScope so it'll be able to last basically 11 and 12 hours. So our team spent some time testing multiple external battery packs, very similar to what you will do with your smartphone. For example, when you're traveling, you may have a little external battery pack that looks like this one here. And you just plug in your phone to it, and that will recharge the phone, or it will make the battery last a lot longer. For example, when I'm traveling on a plane, basically I plug in my phone to one of this, and that will keep the battery charged all the way. So if I'm in the air for 4, 5, 6 hours, when I land, I still have a full charge on my battery. So it will be something similar here for the AirCheck G2 or the EtherScope. You have the option of using an external battery pack. You just plug it in, and that will keep the battery on the AirCheck or EtherScope charged throughout the entire day. Based on our testing, this will extend the battery life by about 9 hours. So if you add that to the internal battery, that basically gives you between 11 and 12 hours of battery power. And the cool thing is that these little battery packs are fairly small, so you can, for example, carry them on your pocket or in a backpack, or you can strap them to the back of the unit. It will make it a little heavier, but hey, it's good exercise, I guess. Um, Notice that we did some testing, like I mentioned, and we have some recommendations on the battery packs that will work the best depending on the unit. For example, for the AirCheck G2, we found out that the XT Power MP-10000 will do a great job keeping the AirCheck up and running all day long. And for the EtherScope, you'll need something a little more powerful because of all the Ethernet ports. And so we recommend the Power Arc Pack, which we found works pretty good for the EtherScope. So two options there if you need to basically spend all day doing site surveys. Another thing or another question we get a lot is regarding the USB thumb drive that you can use to import floor plans into an AirCheck or EtherScope. So right now, as it is on the AirCheck, to be able to import the floor plan, you need to transfer it or import it using a thumb drive into a unit. On the EtherScope, you have more options, being an Android-based device or a smart tester. You have the option of emailing the floor plan or just basically putting it on a shared drive. You could use the USB port, and you can download it from the internet if you want, and so on. Still, if you decide to use a thumb drive to transfer the floor plan into your unit, Notice that at this time, the format that's supported is FAT32. So make sure that before you try importing a floor plan, that your thumb drive is using the right format, else the unit will not see the floor plan in there. Notice though, one little tip, and don't tell anyone, but we are planning on adding other formats or adding support for other formats like exFAT. So if you have a very big thumb drive, then we'll be adding support for those in the near future. So keep watching what's coming up next. So, but something very important there to keep in mind before you even start doing a site survey. Then, now that you're ready to start, or basically the next step is to import the floor plan. And there's a few other tips that you may want to be aware of or know about before you go out there and start doing a site survey. First, let's talk a little about the AirCheck G2. Notice that, as you guys may know, the hardware on the AirCheck G2 and the EtherScope is different. So there's a few differences on the options that are available to import a floor plan. On the AirCheck G2, like I mentioned a few moments ago, basically at this time, the only option available is by USB port. We'll be adding more options in the future. Again, something to look for. But right now, you have to use one of the USB ports on the side, which we can see here on this little photo. The important part here, or the part I want to highlight though, is that even though there's two USB ports on the AirCheck, the upper port is a lower powered port, and the lower port is a higher powered port. So one thing to keep in mind, if you're using a smaller USB thumb drive, I don't know, let's say 1 gig, 2 gigs, maybe 10 gigs, and that thumb drive doesn't take a lot of power to basically power up, you can use any of the two ports, the lower upper one. Still, there might be cases where you have, let's say, newer USB 3 high-powered thumb drives. And in that case, you may notice that if you plug it into the upper port of the AirCheck may not recognize it or may not see it. So you'll be wondering, hey, why is it not seeing my floor plan? Well, the reason is that the upper port is lower powered, so it can't power the USB thumb drive correctly. So in that case, just try out the lower port, USB port, which is higher powered, and that should be able to power any USB thumb drive out there in the market. So now you should be able to see the floor plans and import them. Ooh, another thing that I should have written here. Basically, on the AirCheck G2, for it to be able to see the floor plans, you need to make sure that floor plan is saved on the root of the USB thumb drive. So if the floor plan is inside the folder, it will not see it. You have to make sure the floor plan is saved on the root of the drive, and then that's where the AirCheck will be able to find it. It's a little different though with EtherScope. On the EtherScope, the USB port is available at the top of the unit, the USB-A port. It's high power, so you shouldn't need to worry about the differences or what we saw earlier with the AirCheck. Like I mentioned earlier, the USB port is not the only option you have on the EtherScope. The EtherScope being more of a smart tester allows you to, for example, email a floor plan to yourself. You could use, I don't know, a shared drive, a company shared drive to pull the floor plan and into the unit. You can just download it from the internet. Or hey, let's say you don't have a floor plan, so you can just go and look for a fire escape floor plan and use the camera to take a photo of it and use that as a floor plan. Or you can just manually draw something and just take a photo of it. Or you could use a drawing app and just create your own floor plan on the app and then use that. So you have a few more options on the EtherScope to import a floor plan, and more will be available very soon. So a few extra options available on the EtherScope NXG. Ooh, also one thing, notice that on the EtherScope, since you have the basically file browser available, you can save the floor plan inside a folder if you want, and you just browse and find it. A few other details regarding floor plans before you even start doing your site survey. There's no limit on the floor plan size. Notice this, I'm not talking about the file size, but the floor plan size itself. So it could be just a small office. It could be a million, I don't know, a 100,000 square feet warehouse or bigger. So there's no need to worry or concern yourself with that part. Just make sure that you calibrate the floor plan correctly, and we'll be talking about that a little more in a few moments. The other thing that you need to concern yourself though is the image file size itself. So not the floor plan size, but the file size itself. Notice that you'll be limited by the internal memory, of course. So if, for example, you have a 30 gig floor plan, 4K floor plan or something, that may be a little too much for the internal memory. So make sure that at least file size wise, you try to keep it small so you don't run out of memory space inside your unit. Okie doke. So another very super important thing to keep in mind before you even start doing a site survey with AirMapper are basically the scan preferences. So before you even start, hey, let's take a look at what am I scanning? What do I need to get the information I want? And let's start with scanning mode. So on the AirCheck, there's only one scanning mode, basically the current scan. I'll explain what that is in a moment. And on the on the EtherScope, there's two options: scan once or current scan. So let's start with scan once. This is basically the first option we had available on when we released AirMapper on the EtherScope last April, if I remember correctly. And basically, this is like a tap to save type of thing, where you basically go to a spot, you tap on the screen, you wait a few seconds for the unit to scan through all the channels, and then that's saved, and then you go to the next spot, you tap, and repeat. Works, but it's a little slow. It requires you to wait on every spot until the scan has been completed. So just like a month later or a few weeks later, we were like, we should improve this and come up with something better. And that's where we introduced the current scan mode, which basically has some similarities, but think of it more as a hybrid between the tap to save and the continuous um, mode. Basically, what happens here is that even before you tap on the screen, the unit is constantly scanning. So as you walk and move from one step to another, it's already scanning. So that means that, and saving that data on queue. And that prevents you from losing any data in between spots. And it also allows you to basically not have to wait for the entire scan to be done every time you tap. So that's why if you had used the original version of AirMapper, you may have noticed that scan time or survey time is a lot faster because now you don't have to wait on every spot anymore. Basically, you walk, you're scanning, saving data. You just tap whenever you want to save that data into memory, and you continue, and so on. So it makes it a lot more efficient. And when the AirCheck came out, basically we're like, the current scan is a lot cooler, so let's make that the default on the AirCheck. So notice that again, on the EtherScope, you do have the option of changing it back to scan once mode if you want. The default will be current scan, and that's the recommended option. Okie doke, channel selection. So we were talking about scan time and having to wait and how long it takes, etc. Well, channel selection helps with that. So let's say that, for example, your network only works on the 5 gigahertz. You gave up on the 2.4 and you're like, we don't want to use that. Let's just use 5 gigahertz only. So if that's the case, there's really no need for you to scan the 2.4 band. So basically, you can disable all the 2.4 channels. And what will happen is that now, basically, your scan time through all the channels will be a lot faster. You're almost cutting down the scan time in half. So, hey, if you don't need specific channels or specific bands, just disable those on the unit. And that way you don't have to spend time waiting for the unit to collect information that you don't need. If you're using both the 2.4 and the 5, then it's recommended that you scan both. If you're using specific channels, or you know, for example, that you say your controller is not configured to use the DFS channels, then hey, just disable the DFS channels. That will save you some time too. If you're scanning everything, or you want to scan everything, then hey, that option is there, and that's the default. Channel dwell time is the other thing you need to take into account when you're setting up your AirMapper Site Survey tool. And basically, this is how long the unit will spend scanning a specific channel. The default on the EtherScope is 110 milliseconds. The default on the AirCheck is 250 milliseconds, and then there's more options available that you can use. Notice that recommendation, if you want to make the most of your time and basically improve scan time, is to use a 110 milliseconds as the default scan time. Notice that since by default most access points send a beacon out every 100 milliseconds approximately, then basically 110 milliseconds gives you enough time to capture all beacons on a clean environment. Still, you may be wondering, well, if that's the case, why do you give me the option of increasing that time and making it slower to do the survey? Well, the reason is that on noisy environments or environments with a high utilization, the access points may take longer to send out those beacons. It could be because they have to wait for a lot of traffic in the air, high utilization, or it could be because there's a source of interference in the area. There's a high noise floor. I don't know, let's say a microwave oven or something else in the area that's generating noise, and the APs are just waiting for that noise to go away before transmitting. So in cases like that, using a short scan time may cause you to miss or miss some of those beacons and thus not see some of the APs in the area. So if you notice that, hey, I'm not seeing some of the APs here, what's going on? You may want to increase the scan time, for example, to 250 milliseconds, and see if that's enough time for you to capture those missing beacons and basically gain visibility on those APs that were not showing up. Very super worst case scenario, and this is pretty bad if you have to do this, you also have the option of increasing it to 500 milliseconds. If you're having problems seeing the network and you still can see stuff while waiting 500 milliseconds on a channel, there you have a bad problem with noise or interference, or it's completely possible that the APs were configured to use a longer beaconing time, although most people doesn't change the default of 100 milliseconds in there. So things to keep in mind, make sure by default, I will always start with 110 milliseconds. If you're having problems seeing APs or things are not showing up, try increasing the dwell time and see if now you can see everything in the area. Of course, again, tip, if you have to do this, it normally means you have a very noisy environment or a very high utilization or very busy environment. Okie doke. So now that we got the settings on and scan time done, another thing you may want to do, or you will need to do technically, is setting up your project. And there's a few things, a few tips on how to properly set up the project. Number one, let's talk about calibration. So calibration basically is used to tell the AirMapper app what the dimensions of your floor plan are. And this information is very important because it's used to calculate how far the signal will propagate and how that signal will basically attenuate over time. So if you don't calibrate your floor plan correctly and you have basically wrong dimensions, all the data you collect will be inaccurate or incorrect. One important tip though in here is that you should try to use the longest possible known distance to calibrate. Sure, you do have the option of just saying, okay, I have this door here or this doorway, and I know it's 3 feet or 1 meter from one side to the other. I can use that. And yeah, you can use that. Notice though that the accuracy, the shorter the distance that you use for the calibration, the lower the accuracy of the calibration will be. So the recommendation is to use a longer distance if possible. For example, on this screenshot I got here, sure, I could have used, I don't know, this little doorway here or this other doorway here, or maybe one of the cubicles in here. But best practice is that the longer the value you use, the more accurate your calibration will be. So if you know, for example, what the distance is on this side of the building to the other, that's the best option in there to use when you calibrate. Notice that a good tip or best practice for any site surveyor is to always carry with you a measurement tool. So if you have one of those little laser measurement tools and so on, hey, make sure that you keep one of those around so you can basically take accurate measurements or distance measurements for your calibration. Next, besides the calibration, another part that's super important and some people forgets about is the signal propagation. This basically tells you how far basically from the center or where you collected the data, the software will assume the signal will propagate. So for example, on this little screenshot here, the little gray dot is where I was standing at when I tapped on the screen and collected the data. And the green circle is basically the propagation assessment. And what we're assuming here is that the signal strength that was measured on the gray spot will be the same throughout the radius of the circle. So very useful. So because basically you don't have to basically walk or take a data point on every little spot. It was called extrapolation. Still, if not used correctly, it will also give you inaccurate information. For example, if you use a too big of a signal propagation, like on this other screenshot here, you may see that, hey, I don't have to collect that many data points because it basically shows me what my coverage will be all around this big circle here. But that will be bad data. Basically, if you measure your signal strength, for example, here, that signal strength may be the same until it gets to this wall. But after it gets past this wall, it will most surely be lower. So by using a big signal propagation, you're basically causing the AirMapper tool to give you inaccurate information. So a few tips on how to set up signal propagation. If you're working or performing a site survey, let's say in a hotel or a building with walled offices, basically there's hallways, lots of offices side by side. The best practice is to keep your propagation smaller. Let's say, for example, 10 feet. So basically you have smaller circles. And yeah, you will have to collect more data points. So you'll have to tap more often on the screen. But this will give you more accurate information because it will take into consideration the signal changes or how the signal is attenuated when it goes through those walls in between offices or hallways. Another tip or another example, let's say you're at an office with cubicles. So it's mostly open, just a bunch of cubicles. In that case, hey, using maybe 20 feet as a signal propagation will work. But it's a little more open more open space. There's not walls that will attenuate the signal so badly as on the previous case. Another example, let's say you're doing a survey at a warehouse or an airport, convention center, a mall, basically a fairly open area. Sure, there's equipment, there's little stands, there's chairs so people sit and stuff like that, but it's fairly open, or more open than an office with walls, etc. So you could increase your propagation to 30 feet. And then if you're outdoors, depending on the environment, let's say you're in the middle of a city with buildings all over the place. So you can increase the propagation. Not go too crazy though, because those buildings are still there. You have the option, let's say that you're in a more open area, let's say a park or something like that. Those trees and maybe a few buildings, but it's still fairly open. And then you're like, I don't know, maybe in a very open park where there's not a lot. And in that case, hey, you can crank up the propagation. That way you don't have to collect so much data, because there's really not a lot of stuff out there to attenuate the signal as it flies or goes through the air. So the main idea is the smaller the space you're surveying at, the smaller the propagation should be. And if you're in very open space, then hey, you can increase the propagation. Again, smaller propagation means you'll need to collect more data points as you walk, because you need more samples. And bigger propagation is less data points, but also less accurate or less information. So very important to keep in mind. And again, if you see something like this, you're doing it correctly. Although on this example, I still will have used something maybe a little smaller. If you're seeing something like this though, or you see that your entire screen is green anytime you tap, that means that you're using too much propagation, too high of a signal propagation for the size of the building. Or it could also mean that you calibrated the building incorrectly and the dimensions are incorrect. So if you, let's say, use a 10 feet propagation and you see something like this, that means that your calibration was not done correctly, or the building is a lot bigger than you may think. Then another tip here pretty quickly. When you're naming a floor plan, basically try to use descriptive information. So if you're, let's say, in a building with multiple floors, try using the name of the building and say floor 1, and then floor 2 or floor 3 and so on. Or if you're just basically surveying part of a building or a floor plan, and let's say it's conference room A or conference room B. So hey, just so you can keep track of where the site survey was performed, and basically if you do lots of them, you can find them easily later. Okie doke. So now that we finished with all the settings and the setup, it's time to perform a site survey. And tips and best practices before you go out there. And notice that this applies to both the AirCheck and the EtherScope NXG. It's the same process. First, and this is basically something you'll do with any site surveying tool as a best practice, but plan your route. Before you even start walking around, hey, decide, okay, I'm gonna start on this corner here, for example. Then I'll walk around this conference room, come this way, blah, 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 da-da-da-da-da, and so on. So that will save you time instead of you maybe, let's say, starting, I don't know, say down here, then coming up here, then having to walk back and so on. So if you plan a route, basically it will save you time because you can select the most efficient route ahead of time. It will also prevent you having to walk around the same place multiple times, which again saves you time. And it will also look your path look a little nicer too. So plan your route ahead of time. Another tip, collect new data points at the propagation border. So when you're basically doing a site survey with AirMapper, you want to collect as much data as possible without having to spend too much time at it. That's where the propagation radius comes in, like I mentioned earlier. So basically best practice. Let's say that I collect a data point here. So I'll just walk to the border of my radius for that propagation. And then you should collect another data point there. And so on. Basically, you walk till the border of the propagation radius and just collect data points like that. That way you'll have enough data that will cover everything. You won't end up with holes in between, like this bad case scenario here, bad practice, you could say, where you just randomly takes data points all over the place. That's not very accurate. So make sure that, hey, you collect enough data points and that you don't leave holes in between. Another tip, a very important one, and again, this applies to almost every site surveying tool, is to collect a data point before changing directions. So let's say that I start here, I walk, oh, I need to change directions. Even if I'm not at the border, let's click in there. That will tell the AirMapper software that, hey, you're changing directions. And when you look at the path later, like on this one here, you'll be able to see that the path changes. If you don't, you'll see something like it crosses over a bunch of cubes or walks above through the wall and things like that. It's not best practice. And it looks a little weird if you can see lines running over walls and other things in the area. So always make sure that you collect the data point when you're going to change directions. Okie doke. So you're done doing your site survey. You walked around, you followed the best practices, and now it's time to save your results. So there's a few options available. One, as you guys, or many of you, I'm hoping, know, you have the option of uploading your results to Link Live, which is our cloud-based project and tool management system. So you can keep track of all your tools in there, AirCheck, EtherScopes, and so on. You can have all your site surveys saved in there, any other connection tests, etc. are in there. So you have the option of uploading those results. Things to keep in mind is that for the AirCheck or EtherScope to be able to upload those results to Link Live, you need to be connected to a network. So in the case of the EtherScope, it's easier. Basically, since you have two Wi-Fi radios, one is used for the scan, the other one can be used as a connectivity radio, where you can just connect to a network, stay connected, and basically as soon as you're done with your survey, you can click save, and it will do the upload to Link Live, and it will just upload it to Link Live right there because you're already connected using the secondary radio. If you're not connected to a Wi-Fi network though, let's say there's no Wi-Fi in the area, for example, you also have the option of using the Ethernet ports to connect and then just upload those results to Link Live. Notice an important thing here. Let's say that you don't have an active connection, but you perform multiple surveys. Then those surveys will stay in queue. So you don't need to worry. It's not like they will be overwritten. You don't lose the data nor anything. They'll just stay in queue. Let's say you do 10 surveys, or you have a big project and you do 10 separate surveys, or decide to save 10 separate ones and merge them later on Link Live. Because hey, no need to save them locally. Just select the Link Live option. They'll stay in queue until you can connect to a network, and then all of them, for example, all 10, will be uploaded. In the case of the AirCheck, it's similar, but notice that the AirCheck only has one Wi-Fi radio. So for you to be able to upload the survey to Link Live, you'll have to finish your survey and then connect to a network. You have two options there. One, you could just run a connection test using Wi-Fi, or you could just plug into an Ethernet port with an internet connection, of course, and that will load or upload the project to Link Live. Like I mentioned earlier, same thing as with the EtherScope, you will be able to queue up multiple surveys. So you don't need to worry about losing survey data if you're not connected. It will all stay in memory, until you connect to a network. Second option is to save the results locally or to internal memory. In the case of the AirCheck, basically you'll save the data into internal memory or the site survey data. And then at a later time, you can just use the manage files option to transfer those surveys to a USB thumb drive. So notice that you don't have to save and transfer every time. You can save multiple files. They all stay in memory or multiple projects. Let's say again 10. You can save all of them into the internal memory. And then when you're done, you can just transfer them all to USB. On the EtherScope, it's a little, you have a few more options besides the USB option. You can just email a project, or you can basically use any shared drives, or you can just upload it to a website somewhere. So you have lots of different options on how to get that project information out of the unit after you saved it locally. Notice one tip is that, and this was recently, really, a couple of weeks ago. So initially, if you saved an AirMapper project locally, that AirMapper, that project, you had no way of uploading it to Link Live. So maybe you changed your mind. You were like, okay, let me save it locally. And then you're like, well, I want to try and use Link Live. So, and then, well, there was no option to upload a local file to Link Live. Well, that's changed. You now do have the option of basically taking any AirMapper projects that were saved locally and upload them to Link Live later. So that's a new option that came out recently, just a couple of weeks ago. So if you haven't tried it yet, feel free to, and I'll show you in a few moments where to find that option on Link Live. But that's fairly new. Okay, talking about Link Live. So tips and tricks on how to analyze the AirMapper heat maps on Link Live. As you know, this is our cloud-based option. And the first thing, and I already mentioned this really, you do now have the option of uploading an AMP file that was saved locally to Link Live. You can do that using this little icon here. So that's new. You may not have noticed it. So basically, when you go to AirMapper on Link Live, where you have all the list of all your surveys, you'll see a new option here on the lower right that will allow you to load or upload an AMP or AirMapper project that was saved locally. And then that project will show up on your list of site surveys. So again, pretty new option. Another thing you may not know about, or maybe you knew, but you haven't tried it. Let's say that you have this big site and basically, hey, it takes you multiple days to complete the project. So you have to save, if you divide that site survey into, let's say, 4 different projects, and you save them separately, and you upload into Link Live, and they'll all show up as separate projects, 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, instead of having to analyze them separately, you do have the option of merging those projects. So you can just select using the little checkbox next to each of these surveys. And if the floor plan is the same on each of those projects, then you have and it's been calibrated, it's using the same calibration, then you do have the option of just merging those into a combined project. So now you can see overall how that Wi-Fi network looks like instead of having 4 different sections or separate projects. Notice, very important, this will create a new project, but it will not delete the old ones. So the, let's say, 4 separate projects will still be there. You'll just have one more that shows you a combined view of the entire site or project. It's also pretty cool, let's say if you have multiple people doing a site survey, and each one, they have the same floor plan, they calibrated the same way. Now they're walking around, but they're doing different parts of the floor plan. You can have everyone just upload their floor plans to link live and have them under the same organization or account. And then basically you can just select all of them and merge them together. So if you basically some teamwork or collaboration in there. Another important thing to keep in mind, when you're doing a site survey with AirMapper, it's not only about just collecting the data for the heat maps. It's about making the most of out of your time while you're walking out there. So in the background, the AirCheck and EtherScope are also collecting other extra information that you may not be aware of. And it shows up after you upload it to Link Live on the View Analysis section. Basically, if you go to View Analysis, what will happen is that you'll have access to utilization information. You'll have visibility into all the client devices. So it's not only the APs, you can also see all the clients and what networks they're connected to, or what type of security are they using, what the type of data rates, and so on. So all the information for client devices will also be available as part of the AirMapper project. And there's also non-802.11 interfere detection and identification. So any, let's say, microwave ovens, wireless video cameras, and so on. So any non-Wi-Fi devices in the area, the AirCheck and the EtherScope are seeing those devices while you're walking around the site doing your site survey, and they're collecting information about those devices. And that information will be available when you go to the View Analysis section. Again, the idea is to make the most out of that walkthrough. So if you're walking around the building, hey, let's collect as much data as possible while you're doing that. Another tip, you may have noticed that sometimes you will look at the heat map on your mapper, or you're trying to look at a heat map on your mapper, but the option is grayed out. It's like, hey, why ain't this option available? I have my AlliCare, I should be able to get access to all the heat maps. Well, the reason is that some heat maps require a filter. For example, the AP coverage heat map, for it to become available, you'll need to select a specific SSID. After all, the main idea of the AP coverage heat map is to show you what the coverage of your network or specific network is. So you need to select what that network is before you can look at the heat map. Another one is the beacon overhead. Basically, this one shows you, hey, how much beaconing is going on out there and how is it affecting my airtime? Well, to make it easier to see that, you need to filter by channel. So you select a specific channel, and now you'll be able to see for that channel basically what that beacon overhead is, and how is it affecting airtime utilization on that channel. And then for max transmit MCS or receive MCS, you need to select a media type. After all, as you guys know, the modulation and coding scheme options may change depending on the type of 802.11 technology you're using. So if you're using N, AC, or AX, there may be more options. For example, on AX, you have option 10 and 11, which are not available on AC. So you need to select a media type on the filter first, and then the MCS heat maps will become available. Okie doke. Another one here, very super quickly. I'm running a little short on time. I took too much, I know. But basically, a few tips on AirMagnet survey. So one thing to keep in mind is that, and some of you may know this, some of you may not, that there's multiple versions of the AirMagnet survey software. Basically, we have these flexible licensing options where you can have what we call Survey Pro, which includes both planning and surveying. You could have what we call Survey Express, which is only surveying. Or you can use even our rental option, which is Survey on Demand. Or of course, you have the planner only by itself too. So one thing to highlight is that the AirMapper projects are supported on all the survey options. So if you have Survey Pro, you can import AirMapper projects. If you have Survey Express, that will work too. Even in the rental option, Survey on Demand, you can import and analyze data from an AirMapper project. So basically, it's available for all the flavors of the survey software. So you don't have to worry about having to change the version of software that you're using. It's available for all of them. As for transferring an AirMapper file to Survey Pro, there's a few options here. Of course, you get Link Live. Hey, you can upload an AirMapper project to Link Live and then download it later to your laptop, tablet, or PC with Survey. You'll be like, well, who's using a PC to do Survey? Well, guys, you don't need to walk around with a laptop anymore or a tablet. So you can install your AirMagnet software on a PC, leave it there, and just do your survey with AirMapper using an AirCheck or an EtherScope. So yeah, you could transfer or download that file or the AirMapper project from Link Live into a PC too, if you need it. Shared folders. Hey, you can, let's say, using an EtherScope, upload an AirMapper file to a shared folder. And then from somewhere else, you can just pull that data and open it on AirMagnet Survey. Email, same thing with EtherScope. You can, like I mentioned, you can email a project after you're done, and then just open it with your AirMagnet Survey. And of course, there's the thumb drive option where you can just save the project to a USB thumb drive, and then just plug that in into your laptop, tablet, or PC, and basically open the project there. And then a very important tip that some people forgets about. So let's say that you have an existing project on AirMagnet Survey, or like I mentioned earlier, you have a big project that you divided into multiple smaller surveys, and you're not using Link Live, maybe for X or Y reason. Hey, you can't use a cloud service, so you're using AirMagnet to do the analysis. So you may be wondering, hey, how can I take all those projects and merge them on AirMagnet Survey? Or how can I take my AirMapper data and merge it or import it into an existing AirMagnet Survey project? Well, what happens when you import an AirMapper project into AirMagnet Survey is that that project gets converted into a AirMagnet Survey format or the SVDX format. So it becomes a native AirMagnet project. And because of that, now that that AirMapper project is an AirMagnet Survey project, you have the option of basically using the option that we call import survey data to basically take that AirMapper project and that was saved as a survey project or an AirMagnet project and import it into a different project. So if you have, you can take your AirMapper data, import it into AirMagnet Survey, now open the other project you want and use the import survey data option to import that AirMapper project into your existing AirMagnet Survey project. And notice that you can do that multiple times. So if you, for example, import 3 different AirMapper projects, now since they're saved as SVDX or the AirMagnet Survey format, you have the option of merging all those projects into a single one. And of course, you get access into all the other functionality that's available on AirMagnet Survey Pro, like the simulation mode, multi-view, diff view if you want to compare the AirMapper survey against a plan, or you can use Airwise reports and so on. So basically, we give you this flexibility. You have this flexibility of importing that AirMapper project into and merging it or adding it or analyzing it with AirMagnet Survey Pro. And okay though, guys, we're running a little over time here, so not sure I'll be able to do much of the demo. But one last thing to remember before we open for questions. Remember that Link Live is free. Still, if you have an AlliCare support contract on your handheld, AirCheck or EtherScope, you get some extra functionality when it comes to AirMapper. So for example, for free, you get signal strength heat maps. you get SID filtering. But if you want to see everything else, noise, SNR, code channel interference, adjacent channel interference, or you want all the other advanced options, filtering options, and so on, or other future heat maps that we'll be adding, then hey, to enable those, an AlliCare support contract on your unit will do that. So make sure to check it out. Not required if you just care to do a coverage analysis or signal strength heat map. That's basically available for free. But if you want more advanced analysis information, your AlliCare support contract will activate or enable those on Link Live. Okay, guys, so now I was supposed to do a live demo, but I only have 4 minutes left. So we'll have to skip that part, but I'll make sure to do it next time. Also, if you want to see the new functionality, or you want to just review some of this later, feel free to let us know or contact us, and we'll be happy to do a live demo for you. Now, before we go to QA, a few super quick reminders. Training options. Hey, you want to learn more about how to use AirMapper? Basically, hey, we have our quick start trainings with Mr. Mike Pinaki from Network Protocol Specialist. So feel free to contact him anytime if you're interested in learning more about how to use AirMapper or some of our other products like the EtherScope, Link Runner, etc. And then, of course, let's say you want to become AirMagnet certified and you want to know more about how AirMagnet works, all the functionality, what are best practices with planning or designing a new network. Hey, then check out our friends from WITS. There are official AirMagnet, and they host our official AirMagnet Academy and basically provide certifications on our AirMagnet products, including the AirMagnet Survey Pro. Oh, and also AirMapper now that it's included as part of that. Another super quick ad, you may not know this, but we recently won, or the EtherScope recently won an award from Network Computing 2020. We want to thank you all for basically helping us make it there. EtherScope is an incredibly great product. And hey, we're very proud of it and want to thank all of you that basically made this happen. And now we're open for any questions with the 2 minutes we have left. So Mr. Klimke, I don't know if there's any questions on the queue left to answer.
There are a couple, Julio, that I'd like you to address.
Sure.
One question, well, one I can address is that there have been a couple of questions about whether people can get a copy of the presentation. And we will be sending an email out with a link to that. So if you've registered, well, you'll get an email with a link as follow-up from us on that front. A question here, what, let's see, is there a scan mode where you can simply walk instead of tapping the screen?
That's a great question. So right now with the current version, you have to tap when you want to save a data point. Still, it is on our roadmap to add a basically automatic, I guess, save option where you just walk and it saves data points every so often, very similar to AirMagnet Survey. So that's on our roadmap and we'll be including that in the future. But right now, only the tap to save option.
And tell you what, for those who wish to remain, unless Julio, you've got something else you got to get to, I would suggest that you could go ahead and do a really quick demo. So maybe I'll have you arrange to just start cooking on that. And
Sure.
while we do, we will answer a couple more questions. So that was the scan mode. Question around the software licensing. So maybe I can address that. With respect to software on your AirCheck, to specifically speak about AirCheck, the most recent code on AirCheck supports the AirMapper functionality, the collecting of the survey data. There is no licensing around the Link Live cloud service per se. However, as Julio mentioned, customers with AlliCare support get access to the more detailed, in-depth heat map options. So everyone with an AirCheck with the latest code can generate, collect survey data and generate a signal coverage heat map. But to get to the in-depth visualizations, you'll have to have AlliCare. But it's unlimited seats. However many people in your organization you want to have access to AlliCare, or excuse me, to Link Live, there's no licensing on that front. So I hope that clarifies that. Julio, why don't you go ahead and let's see what it looks like to take a couple quick samples and pop that up to Link Live.
Sure. So thank you guys again for staying a little longer. I apologize for running over. I have the bad tendency of talking too much. But anyway, this is a quick example of how AirMapper looks like on the AirCheck G2 in this case. We also have it available on the EtherScope, so you can see it here. But for this example, I'll use the AirCheck just since I already have it here. So we already talked about importing a floor plan. We talked about signal propagation. For the size of this floor plan, which after calibrating is about 159 by 128 feet, I decided to use 15 feet. That's my signal propagation. Like I mentioned earlier, very important value. And also the calibration is very super important for it to be accurate, else your measurements will be all the way in the middle of nowhere. So the way the process works, just tap on start here in the lower left. Now let's say I want to start on this corner of the building here, or this conference room here. So I tap there. In this case, notice that my signal propagation for this example still seems to be a little too big, so I may want to cut that down a little. So if you see this happen, that's a problem there. Because basically I have to walk here, and now I'll be like, okay, I'm still in the circle there, but I have to change directions, so I should tap again. So yeah, if you see this, that's a bad practice. So how should it look? So let's clear and go back to my little conference room. Okay, so now let me change the propagation here. Let's say I want to do only 10 feet this time. Apply that. Let's start again. Let's go back to my little corner. Tap. You'll see the circle now, it's a lot smaller. And if I walk to the corner here, that looks okay, that looks better. So I can collect another point here. Then go down here, get to the edge of the previous circle and collect another data point. Repeat that, go to the next edge here. I can go out of the room, go here. And that's basically the process. So again, very super important, like I mentioned earlier, make sure that for the size of the building, the propagation value you're using is correct. If you see that those circles are too big or basically covering the entire place, and that may be a little too much. And collect the data, like I mentioned, as you move, a new data point every time you walk to the border of your propagation circle. And so on, you repeat. Pretty straightforward. Notice a little tip that's over here. If you tap on the wrong place, you can always undo using this little arrow here. And you have an infinite number of undos, so you can keep undoing and undoing if you want. So pretty straightforward there. And then I already talked about saving the data. So after you stop the project, you can click on this little floppy drive. And we talked about uploading to Link Live or saving locally. In this case, let's say I want to upload to Link Live. So I just select that, click on save, and that will upload the information to Link Live. Where was it? Here it is. And we'll get back to the EtherScope in a few moments. But let's say that I go to Link Live here now. I notice this little icon here on the left side. The last one is where AirMapper is at. And I have my demo here. This one was completed. So has more information than the few data points I collected there. And I can just do a view survey. Give it a few moments while it generates the heat map. So we can see my floor plan here. And we can see our full heat map in here. So this is how it ends up looking like in the end. Like I mentioned, best practice, make a plan on where to go to, and just, hey, have a nice little path. Just tap every time you change directions, so the path that you took looks nice. In this case, I went through all these conference rooms and so on. Another thing I mentioned, notice that by default, some heat maps will be grayed out. If you want to enable them, you have to use the filters. So let's say I want to filter by, where is it? This one here, let's say, for example. And click apply. Now we're showing only the coverage heat map for that specific SID. And you'll notice now that the AP coverage heat map or option is available. So depending on the filtering, some of the heat maps will only be available if you have a specific filter enabled. In this case, what the AP coverage heat map is showing me in here is that I have an excessive coverage. So technically, best practice is to have at least 3 APs covering each area to have a backup. If two will work too. Always have, if one AP does, you always have a backup. In this case, we have more than 5 APs. We have like 8 APs or 7 in some areas covering everything. So yeah, whoever designed this network here, well, went a little crazy with the number of APs and the power levels for them. Of course, you can click anywhere if you want to see details. So, and then the other part I talked about was the view analysis section. So let's select my project again. Like I mentioned, there's some extra information saved in here. So for example, you can see utilization for the site. In this case, utilization doesn't seem to be a problem. It seems to be pretty low everywhere. So not a big problem in here. You also have client information. So hey, it's not only all the AP information, but also all the clients with their status. Are they connected to a network, or are they just probing all over the place? Hey, is it a Samsung device? Maybe it's one of our devices like an AirCheck or an EtherScope, a laptop with an Intel chipset, what network they're connected to, iPhones. So all those devices can be seen here. And then also any non-802.11 interferers are also available. For example, wireless video cameras, Bluetooth devices, and so on. And not only do you see what device it is, but what the power or signal was when we saw it, what the duty cycle or the amount of traffic was. For example, this wireless video camera here at the end is very nasty, has a duty cycle of 100%, so that's a lot of traffic it's generating on channels 10 to 14. Okie doke. Then the other part, let's say that instead of Link Live, you prefer something a little more local. So you decide to just use AirMagnet Survey. So you can do that too. In this case, I already loaded the project, but you can see the same project I showed you on Link Live here on AirMagnet Survey. Very similar functionality. You can tap anywhere and you'll have a little table with all the information, similar to what we saw a few moments ago. You have the option of filtering by SSIDs. So let's say you only want to look at this one here, which is the one we were looking at a few moments ago. So you can do that. You also, like I mentioned, on the tips, let's say you wanted to import another project into this one or another AirMapper survey into this one. You can just go to File and use Import Survey Data. And that will allow you to select any other projects that you may have, SVD or SVDX in this case. Notice that the AMPs are converted when you import them. And then you can now merge if needed, or compare before and after, and things like that. So all the functionality that's normally available on AirMagnet will become available for this project in here. And let's see what else. I think that covers the basics, guys. Again, I apologize for running a little over. Oh, well, I guess I can show you very quickly the EtherScope. So one of the cool things about Link Live is that it allows you to remotely connect to, for example, an EtherScope unit. So you don't have to be on site. You don't need to use a VNC or something else. Basically, through the cloud, you have access to any units, which helps with collaboration. So you can see what's on your EtherScope screen. And this one just loaded halfway. Let me reload it. For some reason, this one is loading halfway. Let's take a look here. Apologize for that. Maybe those interferes that I have in the area are messing up with my Wi-Fi. Anyway, guys, the idea is that you can connect remotely to the unit, take control of it. There we go. And then basically do a site survey remotely. So you can have someone walking around the site, for example, and they can just do something. Let's say like that. And then you can say, okay, let's go to this cubicle 29 and start tapping from there, and so on. You can move. And basically you can guide them while they're doing a site survey. So the idea is that the surveyor itself doesn't need to be an expert on site surveying. They don't really need to know what they're doing. You can tell them remotely or guide them remotely as needed, and without having to risk yourself to any diseases or stuff like that, or hey, saving the money that will cost to travel there. And
Julio,
yeah, sure, go ahead.
sorry, Julio, this brings up a question related to the differences between AirCheck and EtherScope. What differences in hardware between the two products would express themselves in what you're able to do on AirMapper?
That's a great question. So one of the bigger differences are not so much on, will not really affect the AirMapper performance or the data collection itself, but some of the other functionality. For example, I think I mentioned this one earlier, the EtherScope has two Wi-Fi radios. It has a scan radio that's dedicated to basically scanning and testing, and the other one is more like a connectivity radio. So you can be connected to a Wi-Fi network at the same time that you're performing a site survey. And that will allow you to, one, remotely connect to the unit while the other radio is scanning. Two, it will also allow you to upload results to Link Live as soon or anytime, technically, because you're already connected. And it makes it a little more flexible. The other part of the EtherScope, and this is not so much hardware, but more about the smart tester thing, where basically you have all the Android functionality. So you could technically just use a web browser to download a file, or some type of file sharing system or offering, or you can just email stuff back and forth. So the advantages of the Android operating system gives you a little more flexibility on how to transfer files or floor plans or projects in and out of the product. And then the extra radio, the extra Wi-Fi radio in there also helps a lot, because basically it allows you to have two connections or a live connection while one radio scans, the other one is connected. So it gives you a little more flexibility. Of course, there's other hardware functionality like the Ethernet capabilities, the 10 gig testing for Ethernet that's also available, or the performance testing on the EtherScope. You can think of the EtherScope as being like a combined wired wireless tester. So it has all the copper, fiber, and Wi-Fi hardware. Meanwhile, the AirCheck is more of a wireless tester. So it mostly focuses on Wi-Fi testing, and thus the hardware is more Wi-Fi focused.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Okay, though, guys. So I think that covers my super quick demo, or at least everything I could show for today. Don't know, Dan, if there's any other final questions in there.
Sure, we could ask one more here. For compliance reporting,
Mhm.
or I guess in any kind of reporting, is LinkLive able to generate reports, or should we rely on AirMagnet Survey Pro for reporting?
Mhm.
Airwise provides some advantages,
Mhm.
or is one method better than the other?
That's another great question there. So there is reporting on Link Live. So for example, I just generated this, loaded this heat map here. So I can go down here to the lower right, and this little icon will allow me to generate a report. So I can just, for example, add this heat map to a report, then go to PDF, and it will generate a basic report. And maybe I should show you here pretty super quickly on how it looks. Notice you can add your logo and stuff like that. So let's generate one there pretty quickly. Notice that the reports will be saved on the uploaded files section of Link Live. So if I go here, you'll see my AirMapper or Link Live AirMapper report. And while that one is processing, I have another one here that I can show you pretty quickly. So I can download that. It will be a PDF. Notice the difference from AirMagnet, which allows you to save the project as Word, Excel, PDF, and other formats. For Link Live, it's only PDF at this time.
That
And then you have all the information.
said, that said, we've optimized the PDF creator in LinkLive to
Mm-hmm.
facilitate importation into Word.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to
Yep.
create a customized document, it's
Yep. So
possible.
basically, you can, of course, like Dan mentioned, import the PDF into Word and customize it as needed there. Then in AirMagnet Survey, for those of you that are familiar with it, you already have the reporting engine. We include multiple, basically, pre-designed reports. You also have the option of customizing any of the reports if needed, like adding logos, changing headers, footers if you want, adding or removing sections, editing the text. So all the customization can be done on the software itself, and then you can save it as Word, Excel, PDF, etc. So it depends on the level of functionality that you want. Both options will allow you to generate a report. In the case of Link Live, since it's a PDF report and there's only one option available at this time, basically you can open it with, for example, Word and do any editing as required. In the case of AirMagnet, it allows you to do the editing here, create a template, and just have multiple your own custom reports that you can generate at any time and basically just share them if needed and so on. So there's a little more functionality on the reporting at AirMagnet at this time, but there is reporting functionality also available on the Link Live. Okie doke. Any other questions, Dan?
With respect to signal propagation,
Mm-hmm.
does the type of access point or access point configuration at all impact your decision around signal propagation radius?
Not really. Basically, it's more about the environment itself, not so much about the access point. What we're trying to do is basically gain a sample of the, let's say, signal strength, noise, SNR, etc., on a specific spot. And the propagation is just an assumption of how far that signal will go from where you're standing without changing. So how the AP is configured, power levels, antenna gain, and so on will not affect that because we still will measure the signal as it is. If it had been a prediction or a plan where you're predicting how the signal will propagate, then yes, in that case, the antenna gain, AP power, and so on will affect how the heat map will look like in the end. But in this case, since you're measuring how the AP is configured, doesn't really matter. We still will measure that sample and show you how it's looking like from the perspective of the client device. It's more about making that assumption or of how far that signal will go without changing around you. And that's the very important part in there, because if you use, for example, a very big propagation and you assume that the signal will be the same here, but also down here, then that will be a mistake, because most surely that signal will be attenuated by this wall and these cubes. So you want to use a smaller propagation to take that into account. So.
And let's answer one last question, and I think we can wrap up. Not with respect to AirMapper, but on AirCheck and the auto test function, are there any limits to how many auto tests can be cached on the G2 before we upload to Link Live?
That's a great question. Yes, there is. If I remember correctly, it's a limit of, it used to be 10 initially, but we did increase that. If I remember correctly, it's about 25 now. I need to confirm that, but we can get that information for you.
But it's at least 10, maybe as many as 25.
It's more than 10 now, yes. It used to be 10, but we did increase that.
All right. I think that's it then, Julio. Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone on the line for being part of the webinar today. This webinar has been recorded. A link to that will be provided to you in an email and to both our attendees and folks who registered but were not able to attend if you'd like to revisit the content. Anything else, Julio, before we go?
Nope, just again, thank you guys for joining us today. Again, we apologize for running a little over, but hey, thank you for staying with us till the end. And if you have any more questions or want to watch the video later, we'll be sending out links for the recording like Dan mentioned, same with the presentation. So you can share it with your team or use it as a reference later. And hey, keep sending us your feedback, and thank you for joining us again.
All right, this concludes our webinar. Thank you.